Here we go. The NFL Strategy Show, Week 11. Season's flying by. Dave Lochran, Sal Vetri giving you your first look at this 11-game Week 11 slate. Of course, it's presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, where you can get in on that 25 or 200K baller, 20K to first for NFL this week. If you're looking to get into something today, 5K to first, $30,000 baller, $10 to enter. 102 max entries, 102 on this one. CSV uploads now, CSV edits, all that's working smoothly. And of course, a bunch of other contests where the max entry is 10. So if you're not looking to go up against a bunch of MME 100 plus entries, you can find it many other spots on the site, and you can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points simply by signing up with us at awesemo.com. Get those YSRPs by going to awesemo.com, clicking the NFL tab. You'll see under the articles, any primetime article, the Thursday night one from yesterday should be right there towards the top. Click on that. It's free. You'll see the link right at the top. We'll also throw the link into the YouTube chat right here so you can find it right away and quickly get your $30 in YSRPs upon depositing. It's as good as cash to be used on the site to play and win money. So no real reason not to sign up over at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. Sal Vetri, how we doing, man?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Come off of week 10. We got just 4 teams on bye this week after the massive 16 bye. So excited to break it down. Some injuries that are definitely going to impact the slate, it seems already.
All right. Well, why don't you, before we jump into all of that, break down a couple of what you think are the most important injuries to be monitoring throughout the week?
Yeah, so it seems like Devonta Freeman is supposed to miss some time. There's no exact amount on that, but you have a already priced up Brian Hill, but probably not priced up enough if he's going to be a main workhorse back there. That's yet to be totally seen, but I would imagine so. Austin Hooper is also listed as week to week, potentially doubtful, which opens up just more space, definitely for a backup tight end in Atlanta, but probably Russell Gage in the slot and Julio and Ridley in the receiving core. So those are two of the bigger ones. You have Ty Johnson left the game with a concussion, so J.D. McKissic played 70% of the snaps last week. Very important to monitor that. And then Matt Breida last night gets injured, as well as Emmanuel Sanders. So we have to watch those for the main slate. Obviously, Lockett goes down as well, but that's not going to be something on this 11-game slate. So those are some of the big pieces of positional news that I saw. Trey Burton, to a minor extent, guys like Jordan Wilkins. But the big pieces are Ty Johnson, Devonta Freeman, Austin Hooper, and probably Matt Breida.
Let's dive right into it then, starting with the quarterback position. Of course, tomorrow, Chris Baggs and I will take a first look at all of the ownership projections, and then Sal and I will be back on Thursday to give you a game-by-game, comprehensive game-by-game breakdown for Week 11. But we started off with a basic look here at all of the positions here, quarterback through tight end, and basically a preliminary look at what we think stands out early in the week, starting with quarterback. Drew Brees, terrible start last time out. The lowest points scored by the Saints at home in the Drew Brees era. He threw 45 times. He had 0 touchdowns in a game that they were 14-point favorites. They lost 26-9. Now he has a prime opportunity to bounce back, Sal, going up against the Tampa Bay Bucks, who just gave up not Christian Kirk's first touchdown of the year, not his second, but all of his 3 touchdown receptions came against the Bucks in Week 10. They're a disastrous secondary right now. They actually just released Vernon Hargreaves. They're in disarray. Does Drew Brees bounce back here? Is he worth paying for in Week 11?
Yeah, I definitely don't. Last week was weird and something that we saw the Falcons finally get pass rush for the first time of the season, and they got 6 sacks. So just a weird game overall. It's a really good spot against Tampa. You kind of have to, in DFS, just forget what happened the week before to an extent. It's a really good spot. Look, the price tag after a terrible game for Drew Brees, perhaps one of the worst in his career, goes up by $200. That's how good this matchup is. He's priced because of the matchup. So, yeah, at $6,900, it's a good price tag. We're going to get into it, though. It's really difficult to just, like, in terms of cash, yeah, it's fine. But when we'll get to stacking, like Michael Thomas, not to bury the lead, he's almost $10,000 as a wide receiver. So the other options are definitely cheap, so it makes up for it. This matchup is just so good against Tampa Bay. It is the best matchup. He's coming off of Atlanta, probably the second best matchup in the league to target. Now he gets the best one. I would expect a big bounce back spot, 5-point favorite, 27.5 team total here.
It's a wild price tag on Michael Thomas.
Yeah, it's probably correct for what he's doing out there, but it's just really, at least early in the week for me, difficult to see me paying for that with any volume.
Consider this for a second. Wide receivers had 19 targets in week 10. 14 of them were Michael Thomas. 14 of 19 wide receiver targets went to Michael Thomas. Jared Cook saw 10, was the only tight end to get a look. So that's a huge, huge market share targets that he saw that week. And then Alvin Kamara saw 10. So Thomas, Kamara, and Cook made up 34 of Drew Brees' 45 pass attempts. That's insane.
Yeah, exactly. We saw Traquan Smith run more routes and see more snaps in his first game back. That's Ted Ginn, so that's something in terms of like stacking. But yeah, Thomas's role is fantastic. We'll get to it for sure, but it's just really tough to definitely pay for almost a mega ceiling on Thomas now this week. If he just scores 24 for you, there's definitely going to be guys who are $3,000 cheaper putting up that type of production as well.
Lamar Jackson's been a stud. I mean, it looks like you're controlling a video game quarterback out there with the spin moves, the jukes. It's truly outrageous, but you've got him priced $800 on DraftKings above the next highest priced quarterback, which is Drew Brees at $6,900. Jackson with a less friendly matchup against Houston, but also not one that's downright awful. He's just so good. His floor is so high, and really at the quarterback position, if you told me, hey, in cash games you got to play one guy each week, and you got to play him every week for the rest of the season, no matter the matchup, I would go with Lamar Jackson, over Russell Wilson and over Patrick Mahomes. I'm sure we could make an argument for either of those other two, but it's just been insane how good he is. At the same time, though, like you said, you have a Michael Thomas at 9,900 against Tampa Bay. You have Christian McCaffrey at 10.5. You have some really solid upper mid-range running backs and wide receivers that you're going to want to pay for. Is it worth paying up for Jackson in week 11?
Yeah, so like the initial thoughts are probably not a necessity. Like you're paying for the ceiling of what he did last week, and he's been fantastic, and he's averaging 78 yards. Like this guy is on pace for 1,248 rushing yards. Those are RB1 type numbers as a quarterback. So obviously the $7,700 price tag, I'm not scared off by it. It's just about opportunity cost of, can somebody else score me 25 fantasy points on the slate? And the answer is more than likely yes. And then you just have to avoid the 35-point Lamar game. So the price tag, it's not scaring me off on its own. I probably once again feel okay getting to him or Hollywood and Andrews in some stacks, but because of Michael Thomas, because of Christian McCaffrey, like you said, it's not going to be a priority. Like last week, Lamar Jackson was a priority
For sure.
on that slate. This week, he doesn't seem like he maybe fits into those top 5 quarterbacks, but not somebody that's going to land the top of the list.
What about some of these other mid-range guys? You've got Garoppolo here against Arizona. He's coming in at 6,700. Definitely a mixed bag for him this season. The run game has shouldered the bulk of the load here offensively. Josh Allen against Miami, certainly a underwhelming season on the whole for Josh Allen. Just the passing game is weak, man. He doesn't have a 300-yard game, which I don't think comes as a huge surprise to anyone. But he's also passed for fewer than 200 yards in, I think, 5 of his last 6. He doesn't have a 3-touchdown passing performance on the year. So you're certainly relying on his rushing upside, which we saw last week. He scored twice with his legs, 28 yards rushing, though, and hasn't had a 50-yard rushing game this season. He's got Miami coming into this game on a 2-game winning streak. Imagine that. Jameis Winston against New Orleans. He's managed to battle through some difficult matchups this season. The price is down from last week in what should be a high-scoring affair, 50-point over-under right now. And then a couple of others here. I'll let you run with them. Tom Brady at Philly. The secondary is vastly improved from what it was, 4 weeks ago, but still not good. And then Matt Ryan at 6,200 against Carolina. Probably someone that I don't look towards, but those are most of the guys above 6K. If you want to talk Derek Carr against Cincinnati, that works as well.
Yeah, so I'll start with Derek Carr. I like him a lot this week, 29.5 team total against one of the worst teams, if not the worst defense in the league in Cincy. 10.5 point favorite leans you to think Josh Jacobs is a good play here, but I think it's a fine spot for Carr. He's priced for the situation, though. He's not 5,500, so I do like Carr this week off the top. I think I might like Matt Ryan a little bit more than you as just a 6.5 point underdog here. 22 team total is not great. Probably not going to have Hooper, not going to have Freeman, so you're down weapons for sure. But at the price tag, I'm still a little bit intrigued just based on some of these other guys tags starting with a guy like Josh Allen. Josh Allen, if he's priced at like 5,800, he's been so consistent, 18, 19 fantasy points a week, but you're paying for him to have 25 points for you. And I don't even think he's done that this year. He relies heavily on his ground production, which is there, 2 rushing touchdowns last week, but he just can't put it together with having a 250-yard day in the air and getting stuff done on the ground. He's just overpriced at 6,600 for what he's been doing this year, even in this matchup. He's played Miami once this year. He's gotten you a nice 21 points, but maybe in cash it's okay just because it's stable and consistent, but it's probably not winning you a tournament. We haven't seen those spike weeks out of him this season. So in this range, Matt Ryan stands out, Derek Carr. I think Jameis Winston is continuously just he's in a good spot. Team total doesn't seem that great, but should be a decent size underdog here. So he's a guy to go back to because, the weapons, and now OJ Howard actually running routes and maybe showed some life last week. So he'll be a guy that I get to somewhere around 5 or 6 in terms of ranking right now early in the week. But I think the guys who stand out the most overall for me are definitely Brees, Lamar Jackson to an extent. I do have interest in Derek Carr, and then Matt Ryan. And then there's just a list of guys that have like question marks by them on the cheaper end. I think Tom Brady is one of those guys right now that I have to look into a little bit more and really just figure out the matchups for guys like Edelman against the Eagles secondary and see how much it helps out projection wise.
My only thing with Ryan is, if Bradbury's back, do they sell out to take Julio away? And then with Austin Hooper out and Devonta Freeman out and no more Mohamed Sanu, you're basically left with Russell Gage and Calvin Ridley. It feels like now, much more than ever, this is a Falcons team that will be easier to defend than they were earlier in the season by a lot. So that would be my concern with Matt Ryan.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And that's something that I know is what it seems like is going to happen with those guys being out. Already pretty much is ruled out week to week for both of them. Freeman 2 weeks probably. And I probably just have to digest it more because seeing that price tag and just thinking this is Atlanta's offense. But like you said, it's going to be Luke Stocker out there with Russell Gage and then Julio in a potentially really difficult matchup. I think the other thing for Jameis at 6,500 that probably swings the pendulum pretty steeply for me this week and maybe even moves the team total by 0.5 point or so is Marshawn Lattimore left that game early last week. If he has to miss, he is like the kryptonite to Mike Evans. If he has to miss, Evans just has we saw Chris Godwin have a good game last time out against New Orleans, and then Evans will just be opened up, and now you have OJ Howard, like we said, coming back to life. It would be just a positive matchup for everybody on Tampa's offense. Marshawn Lattimore is a huge piece of that because he could just take Evans out, and that really hurts Winston.
Be a monster improvement for Mike Evans. We've seen games where Mike Evans is ejected because he starts a fight with Marshawn Lattimore because he had one reception late in the fourth quarter. I think he
goose-egged him this year.
What's that?
I think he held him to just 0 receptions earlier this year.
Yeah. And last year, if you remember, that was the one where Winston came up and stuck his finger in Lattimore's ear.
Yeah.
And Evans got in the fight with him. He has done everything to really frustrate him. Let's talk about a couple more guys, and then we'll go to running back. I want to ask you about number 1, Kyle Allen against Atlanta. I understand Atlanta did a great job of containing Drew Brees. Both teams coming off a bye, but this was kind of like a do or die spot for Atlanta, not in terms of making the playoffs, but what about Dan Quinn? Arthur Blank had said all the right things and such, but Dan Quinn, basically, at this point, it felt like they get crushed in this game. Things look a lot more bleak. I think they came out there. I hate to be the narrative guy, but I do think they came out there and to some extent knew that this game meant a lot more than any other game, coming in at 1-7 off of the bye. I expect their defense to go back to where it was before this game, and it feels like a spot where Kyle Allen could, at 5,300, put up solid numbers. And think about this too. He's cheaper by a lot than Sam Darnold and Jacoby Brissett. He's $1,000 cheaper than Kirk Cousins, who gets the Denver Broncos. He's $1,400 less than Jimmy Garoppolo. It just feels like a mispricing on Kyle Allen given the matchup.
Yeah, I think it definitely is a 28.5 team total too. It's just really hard to ignore. And then, Atlanta's defense is a top 3 matchup, maybe probably second best matchup behind Tampa for passing. You're going to have positive matchups for DJ Moore, who I thought that was the best game of DJ Moore's career against the Packers, even in somewhat difficult matchups. Yeah, at times. He didn't have a lot of Jair Alexander on him, but Kevin King is a solid cornerback at best, average cornerback, and nonstop he was just running crisp routes, getting open. So DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel as well is going to have a good spot here. Yeah, his outside receivers are fantastic. This offense, I tweeted about it after the game. This is the most concentrated offense, and it might actually be to their detriment. you only see last week 5 guys targeted in this entire offense. The 2 receivers, McCaffrey, Olsen, and Jarius Wright, 2 targets. 41 of his attempts, Kyle Allen, went to 4 guys. So in terms of fantasy, it's great. We know where the ball is going. These outside receivers and McCaffrey, and then a little bit of Olsen. Olsen spiked a little bit last week. The Packers all season long cannot cover just shallow crossing routes, especially against tight ends. I don't imagine that is going to be as dramatic against Atlanta, although it's still a good spot. So yeah, Kyle Allen right now ranks out for me as right around 5th or 6th in interest early in the week, but I'm also not taking into account pricing yet. Or point per dollar type of thing. Don't have projections done yet, but yeah, $5,300 is really good for this matchup overall. And we saw it last week. Like, he has had times, and his interception was deflected. He's had times every single week where he shows major improvements. And I mean, in a snow game in the 4th quarter, he takes his team all the way down to the 2-yard line. He looked really good, goes for over 300 yards in that game. So yeah, I've been somebody who's been very skeptical about Kyle Allen earlier in the season, but the last probably 3 weeks, he's taken major strides. I think there's a really good price point on him.
And honestly, I'm still a little skeptical on him, but in this matchup, I don't really care.
Yeah, and I saw, like, they're obviously Cam Newton's done for the year, but now already trade room, or already they said like he's not going to be back next year. So shows a lot of confidence in Kyle Allen for Carolina.
No question. Let's get to the running back spot. You've got a couple guys priced very high. Christian McCaffrey against Atlanta. You just mentioned it. 28.5 implied total here. 6.5 point favorites at home. 50.5 over under, second highest on the slate. I mean, this is, one of the best possible projected game scripts you could find for Christian McCaffrey. He's very expensive. And then you have Ezekiel Elliott at $9K. You've got Dalvin Cook at $8,900. I mean, in a spot like this, and I've had interest in guys like Dalvin Cook when he was this price and McCaffrey was the price that he's at. But it sure feels like if you're going to pay up for a running back on this week, you're going McCaffrey or you're not going to any of these 3 guys.
Yeah, it's McCaffrey. I mean, the price point doesn't change. In a week where it literally felt like he let people down for 140 yards and a touchdown. And also, I mean, he should have had another 40-point week probably. The end of the game, the second to last play, it's an underthrow by Kyle Allen, probably the biggest mistake of the game, to McCaffrey towards the pylon for what would have been a 2-yard touchdown, potentially ties the game, goes to overtime. So he would have finished with about 38 fantasy points. So yeah, this guy's just nonstop. 26 touches. He was averaging 27 coming into last week. Game total is nice. It's going to be really hard, especially, I mean, in cash, it's almost just a free square in my opinion, because the price point doesn't come up and everything's staying the same for him. And now he just gets the nut matchup against Atlanta. So yeah, McCaffrey in any format, be interesting to see where his ownership comes in. It probably depends on if we get value at running back or wide receiver, which it seems like we already have some. So yeah, there's nothing bad to say about him. I would prefer Elliott after that if you are paying up to the 9K range, but there's guys below that range that I think are just better options to get to point per dollar wise.
The truth too is that Elliott from a fantasy standpoint has been really disappointing this season. You might look at the numbers and say, well, not really. I mean, he's finished with fewer than 20 fantasy points in 5 of 9 games, I think. No, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of 9 games he's finished with sub 20 fantasy points. And it's not like many of these have been the most difficult matchups either. He's faced the Giants, the Jets, the Giants again, Miami, Green Bay, Washington. I know that the game script has it's favored him, but they've ended up throwing a lot more. But is Ezekiel Elliott really a 9K running back right now?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say his production right now is if he's a high 7K running back, mid 7K running back. So yeah, like if I'm paying up, it's going to be to McCaffrey. I do still like the matchup for him. We did see Detroit get some guys back last week, and they actually performed rather well against David Montgomery, probably screwing so many people, including myself, last week, 17 carries, 60 yards. But yeah, Elliott, I probably slightly prefer to a guy like Dalvin Cook in that range. But like you said, yeah, he's probably like a top 7K running back. So not somebody who's a priority this week, like some of the guys in the 7 and 6K range. I don't see a total on this game yet. I know they're 3.5 point favorites. It might have came out. I didn't update this.
51.5.
Oh, wow. Really? So it's that high.
The highest on the slate, as a matter of fact.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't have that in yet. So 3.5 point favorite. So that is a little bit intriguing and the matchup for sure. But yeah, you touched on it. I guess it'll really depend for me on ownership. I usually do this with guys like Saquon in the past. If he's like 10 to 12% owned with that talent, I'll just get some more of it naturally. But if he's going to be 20% owned, that seems right. And it's not something I have to take a stance on.
Right. Another thing that it comes down to for me, if I'm just like evaluating a player against another player, seriously, how much different is Josh Jacobs in workload and production than Ezekiel Elliott right now. Jacobs faces a Cincinnati team that is just downright dreadful at defending the run, right? I mean, they rank 29th in run defense DVOA. Pro Football Focus has them ranking 29th again. Just terrible run defense on this team. They're going to be huge dogs coming into this game, 10.5-point dogs. The Oakland Raiders have a 29.5-point implied total. It's the highest on this slate. So if I'm comparing Zeke at 9K to running backs that are in similar spots, actually better spots, how do I not, like, even at high ownership, I don't see how I get away from a Josh Jacobs at a $2,100 discount.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's exactly the spot in this mid-range that just stands out, and it probably will for a lot of people. I mean, Josh Jacobs on the season averaging exactly 21 opportunities per game with his targets and attempts. And then if you look at Zeke, 23.6. So that's the exact difference. It's like 2 to 3 touches, just opportunities actually. Touches-wise, he's only averaging a little over 1 more touch per game, Zeke, on the ground than Jacobs. Their offense for Oakland is not the same offense as last year or the year before, where there's a lot of stalled drives and just a lot of inaccuracy from Derek Carr. They're moving the ball and getting to the red zone. Josh Jacobs has 32 red zone rushing attempts. Zeke leads the slate with 40, so there's upside there, of course, but we know that with Zeke. But I don't think Josh Jacobs, even at $6,900, he comes up $400 since the last time he was priced on a slate. I don't think he's nearly priced up enough for what his role is and how much opportunity he does have. His adjusted line play is one of the best on the slate. He only gets stuffed 12% of the time, so 1 out of 10 carries around there. Yeah, at 6,900, a 10.5-point favorite. It's as good of a spot as you want against right now the team that's giving up the second most fantasy points per game to the running back position, a 29.5 total, like you pointed out, and a 10.5-point favorite. Everything just seems to line up, and he's affordable. So right now, for me, it's Christian McCaffrey and Jacobs stand out as sort of the two guys I really like. And then as the week goes on, based on injury news, seeing how some of this value opens up.
How about the rest of this mid-range? I obviously don't want to skip over the guys below Elliott and above Josh Jacobs. Alvin Kamara, I'm honestly a little bit worried about Alvin Kamara. Same concerns I voiced last week, except so okay. Let's do this and just kind of look at what we saw from him. I obviously think he's still the best back on this team, but Latavius Murray is talented enough to be involved, especially if you're playing with the lead. But how about this, though, Sal? He had Alvin Kamara had 4 total looks in the first half. 4. And then in the fourth quarter, he had 7 looks. He had 6 targets and a carry. They were obviously playing down 17 points. In the third quarter, he had 2 targets and 1 rush, but he had 2 carries and 2 targets in the first half alone. What do you make of that? Because he had 1 fewer carry than Latavius Murray. My concern is if they're playing in competitive games and you don't need to throw to him 10 times in the fourth quarter, I'm worried that you're going to see, and by the way, snap counts, I don't even care about the snap count for last week because Alvin Kamara is the guy that you're using in the passing game when you're playing from behind. What happens if it's a 20-10 game New Orleans or a 14-14 game and it's knotted up or it's a 1-possession game throughout? Do we see Alvin Kamara split workload on the ground with Latavius Murray? Right now, I'm leaning yes.
Yeah, I lean yes too. And I like that he pointed out the snap counts because, yeah, it's almost 80% of the snaps for Kamara, but that's to be expected. I really want to see if we could find, and even in the first half, it was not out of hand, but they were playing from behind. I really want to see just first half snap counts and see if that paints a truer picture. Was it 60, 40, 55, 45, something like that? But yeah, you saw the carries on the ground, low volume for each, so really hard to tell. But if anything to take away from it was it was pretty much a split, 5 and 4 carries, and it went against Kamara. So tough matchup anyways. Kamara is going to survive on volume. I do like that he's not priced in the 8K range, so it at least makes you think at $7,400, he can get there, even if he only plays, 65% of the snaps, which is what you would expect if there's no infiltration more of Latavius Murray here. But yeah, I would lean that this is probably still Kamara's backfield, 60-40 if we had to blow it up, and you get the passing game advantage. So I'm probably a little bit higher on Kamara overall for the season. But that said, for this individual matchup, I just don't like it at 7,400 against Tampa. I'd rather get to Fournette and his incredible role at 7,900, or like we just talked about, Josh Jacobs for cheaper, I think is a much better play as of right now.
Yeah, if you were arguing that Kamara in tournaments makes sense because just the abundant talent, sure. But I have serious concerns about him right now. And I'm usually not a wait and see approach type guy. But the big thing here is you just mentioned Fournette. We talked about Josh Jacobs. There are guys that are priced right around him or below him that I feel great about. And I don't know that I need to get crazy or really cute here going to a lot of Kamara, especially after last game. I just think that Latavius Murray did enough to really start to eat into that workload, knowing that the Saints are going to be playing with the lead in a lot of games. What about the rest of this mid-range here? And then we'll talk some value.
Yeah, so I think that the matchup and just what we've been seeing out of Buffalo with Devin Singletary is extremely interesting. The price point kind of worries me at $6,000, and we saw last week, even though he played 67% of the snaps last week, 66 the week before, and 68 the week before that. So he seems to be just taking on this workload of around 70% of the workload, but in terms of snaps, but we didn't really see that type of split on the ground last week. Frank Gore was still getting just as many carries. So moving forward against Miami, it's a good matchup for both of them. I do worry that the price tag's a little bit inflated on Singletary, but it's one of the best matchups you can get in terms of game flow for a running back. So I have interest there. And then the rest of it's going to kind of boil down to seeing what happens with Matt Breida. For a third straight week, he leaves with an injury. He's going to have a beneficial matchup as a 12.5-point favorite if he plays at a good price point. But if he doesn't, well, then Tevin Coleman just shoots up the board at 6,100 to potentially take on 65, 70% of the load. I imagine Raheem Mostert still sees enough to not make it too overwhelming of an opportunity for Coleman, but still definitely an increase with no Breed out there, especially in the passing game. So Coleman stands out, barring any injury in this range. And then Joe Mixon ran the ball 30 times. He's a huge underdog. So
hold on.
Yeah.
That's nuts, dude. He ran the ball 30 times in a game that they lost by 30 plus points.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are probably mistaken because originally the Bengals ruled out Gio Bernard like on their accounts, and it got transferred to like Roto World and stuff that he was ruled out, but he came back in the game. Like they wrongfully ruled him out. So That was 30 carries with Gio Bernard playing in the second half, and they were trailing the whole game. So they just don't care right now out there. It makes sense. I mean, Ryan Finley is your starting quarterback, can't really throw downfield, but it's an interesting spot to track. He's 5,500. I think he's probably a little bit too expensive, but I would imagine he's going to get 20 carries no matter what, even as 10.5-point underdogs. There's just a lot of other guys below his price that probably see similar volume.
I'm with you, but if it turns out that like Singletary's really popular, and we'll get to Brian Hill in a minute, if he's really popular, it's not crazy at all to say, you know what, Joe Mixon could be a phenomenal tournament play.
Yeah, exactly. The ownership on it, it'll be interesting to see if it comes up just because of the volume you saw and finally had a good game. But I don't think it'll be anywhere near Singletary just because, I mean, he's a hot name anyways, and he's facing Miami. It usually just props up everybody's ownership.
All right, let's I think we hit on, let me just make sure there's nobody that I'm missing here. We're not going to get to, of course, everybody. Tevin Coleman is someone that we'll keep a close eye on Breida and the backfield in San Francisco. Of course, they should be big favorites here on a short week. Devin Singletary, you mentioned, Joe Mixon. Quickly, what are your thoughts on Marlon Mack against Jacksonville in what should probably be a competitive game? He was very, very disappointing in that game against the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, he was very disappointing. And the thing that stood out was he was just game flowed out at points early on. Like, yes, if you get down by 10, you don't expect Mack to just keep hammering the ball. He had 19 carries, but Nyheim Hines played just as many snaps in the mid-40s as Mack. And earlier in the year, we were seeing Mack run a lot of routes and keep Hines off the field. But right now, we haven't been seeing that. So he's slowly becoming, especially at a somewhat elevated price point still, not as much as last week, but it probably didn't come down enough at 6,400. Maybe it's right around where it should be. But even as a favorite here, he's not going to be a priority for me. I do think he's cheap, but he's becoming a guy who, at least over the last couple of games when they fall behind, and we'll see if they get Brissett back and playing healthier. If at least when they fall behind in games, it doesn't look like he's going to keep a role and be out there on the field. So that's a concern for sure. And I really can't confidently say that I trust them to stay ahead of Jacksonville with Nick Foles coming back.
Yeah, no disagreement there. The value guys I want to get into, Brian Hill, J.D. McKissick, Kalin Balzs, this dude stinks. Like, let's just be honest. And I actually thought coming into the year with all the hype at training camp that he was going to be the top dog, he was going to lead the backfield, that, hey, this guy might be good. He's downright dreadful, man. I mean, what do you have, like 43 yards on 20 carries or something? Just downright pitiful performance. And they won, by the way. But we have to talk about him because whenever someone's involved that much, he also had 4 targets, then he at least has to be in the conversation. He also had 82% of the offensive snaps, which is crazy. So there's Kalin Balzs. By the way, this dude ranks dead last. And like, if you look, at least it was before this week. I can't imagine it got any better. Elusiveness, yards after contact per attempt, you name it. Anyone with 30 plus carries, he was right down there at the bottom or right next to the bottom. But anyway, you've got him, Sal, McKissick. And I actually do want to speak a little bit, we'll get to him last, on Jordan Howard. I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Howard comes in at like 1% ownership this week. You know what? Let's start with Jordan Howard. The New England run defense has been exploited against decent teams, right? Bad teams, of course, they're playing from behind. They completely abandoned the run. I don't think we saw an authentic version of the Patriots defense until last week. I'm not taking anything away from Stephon Gilmore or their secondary. They're filthy. But I think they got gashed and they were exposed in the run game. If the Philadelphia Eagles are going to contend, they're going to compete, and they're going to keep this game competitive, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be with Jordan Howard and then spell him with Miles Sanders. And Jordan Howard really hasn't been that bad. He's getting a lot of workload, and he always grinding out 4, 5, 6, 7 yards at a time, and he's getting the goal line work. So that's a long way of saying I do have some interest in Howard at this price, especially if he's very low owned, and I expect him to be.
Yep. Yeah. The last time he was on the slate, he was low owned at like 3 or 4%, and he did not perform great, but you're going to get him there just because of the name, and there's other value on the slate around him. Yeah, I do like Jordan Howard. New England's run defense, like the overall defense is fantastic, and I think people skew that to think that they're great at everything, but their run defense ranks 24th right now on Pro Football Focus, and the reason why it's been kind of hidden up until the past couple of weeks it gets skewed a little bit against the Ravens was they've just been leading teams by 2 or 3 scores. You can't run the ball against them. Coming into the Ravens game, they were giving up the least rushing attempts in the league. So obviously you're not going to have a ton of holes exploited against you when that happens. If a team's running 10 times per game on you because you're up 2 or 3 scores, and a lot of that has to do with defensive scoring. So yeah, Howard here seems like a nice play at 4,700. It is actually an okay matchup for him. Like when you look at fantasy points against, the stat is skewed in some regards because of the fact that teams just don't stay close against this New England team, but they're only 3.5 point underdogs. I like Howard. I actually like Sanders to an extent too for tournaments at 4,100. It's not a high volume thing, but I don't think these guys get owned. I think the biggest question comes in if McKissick opens up and definitely Ty Johnson's out, and it seems like Brian Hill's going to open up. Those guys are all at the same price range. 4,700 Howard, 46 McKissick, 48 Hill is where do we go from there? And I think a lot of it will be dictated by ownership. But McKissick's the guy who breaks free probably the most for me interest-wise early in the week.
Okay. How much, if the slate started today, how much do you think you'd have of McKissick?
So that's actually a really good question because then it's not dictated by ownership. I would, if we knew Ty Johnson was going to be out, I think I'd feel pretty good somewhere right now around like 20% of McKissick. I expect him to probably play minimum of 60 to 65% of the snaps, upside of around 75%, catch 4 balls or so. And at that price tag, it's hard to ignore.
Okay. Anyone else here, or should we take it over to wide receiver?
I think we're good to take it over. Just final closing thoughts on how bad Kalin Balzs sucks.
Please elaborate.
Highest stuff percentage on the slate, 25%. 1 out of 4 carries of his goes for 0 or negative yards.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Truly incredible. He has sucked. Do you think you'll have any of him?
Just the way I don't think so. I mean, Buffalo's been bad as of late, but a huge underdog. And I do think they're going to get more of Gaskin didn't have a single carry. I think they see more of that. He should have had a receiving touchdown underthrown in that game, Myles Gaskin. I think you'll see the spread start to be dictated a little bit. Like 82% of the snaps. I literally was on the show last week saying I don't think they ever give Kalin Balzs 80% of the snaps because they know how bad he is. They've been reluctant to do that over Mark Walton and anybody really. And then I think they saw last week how bad that is. So maybe it gets hinted up because they won, but I probably don't have any just because there's so much value down there.
By the way, Miami wins their 3rd straight, Sal.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. Taking them over Buffalo.
Wasn't it 2 games before their first win that they, if they get the 2-point conversion, they win the game and it was dropped by Kenyon Drake? I think.
Yeah. Against the Redskins.
Yeah, they should have 3 wins.
They should.
Playoff team.
Miami fans are probably so pissed right now that they're winning.
Yeah. I think the game after that they dropped it, that game was competitive too, if I recall. Like they're the real team.
Who was that? They had the lead through the entire first. I think it was Buffalo.
It was so yeah.
Wasn't it Buffalo again?
Buffalo, they lost 31-21, but they were ahead at halftime, or they were close. I don't know if they were ahead at halftime. I think they were.
I think no, they were. Because they were up I thought. Oh, and they had a 14-0 lead on Pittsburgh too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was on the night game. Yeah. Wow. Realistically, they should have 3 wins on that 2-point conversion. It was just dropped. He would have walked right in.
Yep. So if they don't, they at least cover. I'm at least taking Miami to cover that 6.5. Wide receiver, Michael Thomas. You can expand on it from earlier. 9,900's a pretty exorbitant tag, but I guess you could probably make sense of it when you talk about the concentrated targets in Carolina. I'd say the only team with more concentrated offense than Carolina is the Saints.
Yeah, without a doubt it is. And like the price tag is the only reason. I can't say anything bad about the guy's skill set. I've been on record since like mid last year and then definitely this year. He's the most consistent wide receiver in the league. And it just helps when you run some of the best routes and you're only running routes like 10 yards downfield. Like you don't have to worry about catch percentage being down. We talked about last year at times he had like a 95% catch rate because he's just catching 7-yard passes and getting 15 yards out of them. So it's really easy to have good fantasy days. So you talk about this guy's targets, they're up there. Only 2 times this year has he been below 10 targets. He's averaging over 11 targets per game. It's fantastic. Back-to-back 30-point performances. The only problem is he's priced for that ceiling now. Like you need 30 points from him to pay off this price tag, and he can definitely get a few. So I think I'll have interest in tournaments still, but not nearly as much of an extent as some other guys who are literally $2,000 below him and have the same exact upside. So in New Orleans stacks, he's a no-brainer. You get to him, you get to one of the cheaper secondary option guys probably in a really good matchup. But if Michael Thomas goes out there and scores, just say 26, 25 fantasy points, I'm sure there's going to be 2 or 3 other receivers on the slate, definitely cheaper than him. He's the most expensive guy that do that as well. And he just might not be needed. It's similar to what we saw to McCaffrey a couple weeks back. McCaffrey scores 40 points. And I get it. You had a Jalen Samuels, sort of a diamond in the rough to kind of propel him not to be needed. But you're going to need a big game out of Thomas and a lot to go wrong for other people on the slate for it to pay off. It could happen. This is the game that it happens in. It just makes it a lot harder to imagine.
For sure. By the way, a lot of discussion in chat about this Eagles backfield. Sounds like most people. Well, here's one: Jordan Howard, ZZZZZ. Stay away from Eagles backs. Look, he's not a flashy back, but I know you have some interest in. Chat has interest in Miles Sanders. I mean, that's fine. Look, if he converts that, if he catches another one of those 50-yard wheel routes for a touchdown, yeah, sure, there you go. How many carries is he going to get? I don't know. But ever since Doug Peterson said that he was switching up the backfield and Jordan Howard was the guy, he's now seen 42 carries in 2 weeks. So I feel pretty confident that if the game doesn't get away from him, Howard's going to see another 17 to 20 touches. At that price, I'm okay with it. Of course, Sanders got hurt in that one game, but that was in the second half anyway. Anyway, Sal, wide receiver, outside of Thomas, you've got Hopkins against Baltimore. That secondary getting healthy now, it's pretty scary. Amari Cooper against Detroit. He's coming off another big game. Just what a amazing transformation we've seen from him coming from Oakland over to Dallas. Julian Edelman against Philly, certainly an appealing spot there. Julio against Carolina. I'm assuming Bradbury plays. He was questionable, basically a game time decision. And then above 7K, you've got Evans, Godwin, Manuel Sanders above 7K. What do you like here?
Yeah, so above 7K, I do think Julio stands out. We'll see what happens with Bradbury. He was a game time decision, didn't practice later in the week last week. So if he starts to practice, it's definitely a tougher matchup. But I mean, Julio is just matchup proof at that point. No Hooper, he's going to be the priority. You could also argue if Bradbury does play and he's on Julio, you would expect him to be, that it just opens up a lot of things for Calvin Ridley on the other side. So we'll see how that plays out based on Bradbury's health. But I do have interest in Julio. I do prefer right now Chris Godwin over Mike Evans. If Marshawn Lattimore is out, Mike Evans jumps up to one of my top interests up there on the slate. And then, yeah, I'm going to continue to have interest in Amari Cooper. It doesn't matter who's on Amari Cooper. I don't care if it's Darius Slay. Amari Cooper has made – the only guy who suppressed him a little bit was Marshawn Lattimore in a primetime game. But Amari Cooper has made Jair Alexander look terrible. He absolutely destroyed Jair Alexander in a game against him, one of the better cornerbacks, at least we would assume so in the league. Every single week, no matter the matchup against Amari, he's looked really good. Xavier Howard, he schooled for 2 touchdowns. This is just Amari's year. So I actually do like both of the wide receivers, which might later in the week lead to more Dak and stacks of Dallas for me. But Gallup stands out a little bit cheaper, though. But up top, it's Amari, it's Julio and Godwin standing out the most for me. And it's just crazy that you have a $2,000 plus difference from Julio to Michael Thomas this week.
It is insane. And at the same time, we're still going to be at least debating whether or not to play Michael Thomas at that price point.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's just so much more consistency there. I think DeAndre Hopkins is interesting. I would imagine Marlon Humphreys comes out of the slot where he's been. a lot of Marlon Humphrey's in the slot has been because like the best receiver on the other team twice,
Yeah.
Boyd, has been in the slot.
Almost every game over the past like 7 weeks, their top receiver, like didn't they face Lockett?
Yep.
Juju. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then 2 Tyler Boyds with no AJ Green. So, yeah, I would imagine Humphrey comes out, goes on DeAndre Hopkins. We know Hopkins is pretty much matchup proof as well, but I would probably rank Humphrey as a top 5 cornerback in the league, maybe even top 3. So, yeah, it's just a scarier matchup for a guy in Hopkins who's also really up there in price. So, in that secondary overall, Earl Thomas, and even if he doesn't get Humphrey all the time, you still have a decent matchup with Marcus Peters. Yeah, it's not a great spot, but again, Hopkins off some of it. The priorities up there are probably right now Godwin, Amari, and then Julio.
Okay. There's a lot up there, though. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah,
there really is. That could, be a big mover on this slate. I think that will be, as a matter of fact. In the 6K range, Cortland Sutton starts it off at 6K flat. AJ Green, I guess he's going to play or not going to play. I mean, I don't know at this point. He was pissed off that he didn't play last game. We're now going into week 11 and he hasn't seen the field. So I don't know. John Brown against Miami, Gallup against Detroit. T.Y. Hilton, this was supposed to be a multi-week injury. He's now day-to-day ahead of week 11, so we'll play that one by ear against Jacksonville. Adam Thielen is another one where he's week to week, so he's not going to play. I don't see him playing at least. This range actually is not that pretty. Of course, Kenny Golladay against Dallas, and I'm a huge Kenny Golladay guy. I love what I've seen from him this year. His price is getting up there, though. 6K range, not that pretty.
No, not that pretty. It's Michael Gallup stands out probably more so in stacks, but I still do like Michael Gallup. The target share has come down a little bit over the weeks, and then obviously coming off of the injury, but still averaging 8 targets per week. That's pretty good for the upside that Gallup has. I mean, he continues to just get into the end zone. This past week, the targets went back up to 8 after being somewhere around the 5, 6, 7 range. So that was went back up to 10. So that was good to see. So I like Michael Gallup probably the most. John Brown's just been showing a very stable floor in terms of targets and running crisp routes. So I do think there's upside, obviously, in the matchup. 6,400, the price tag slowly keeps coming up, but you haven't seen that explosion yet out of John Brown since really like week 1. So I have some interest in Brown, but it's really just minor interest in Gallup and Brown, and then kind of getting to the 5K ranges where I think there's more. I think you hit it on the head. You have like a lot of guys injured in this range and just not great spots.
Right below that 6K range, though, you have DJ Moore. I really like DJ Moore this week, man. He's averaging 8.8 targets per game. The big thing is he only has 1 touchdown. So I think he's been one of the more unheralded players in football this year at the position because he's not getting in the end zone, but he's got back-to-back 100-yard games, right? On the season, he's got almost 700 yards. He's on pace for what? 1,200 yards receiving. I think he outpaces that just based on how frequently he's been getting looks. He's got double-digit targets in 3 of his last 4, 8 or more targets in 5 straight. 5,900 against Atlanta seems pretty reasonable for DJ Moore. And out of the gate, I'd expect that he and Kyle Allen are both pretty chalky options in week 11.
Yeah, there's 3 guys right now that I have a lot of interest in the 5K range, and 2 of them are the Carolina receivers. So DJ Moore, he's almost the best of both worlds. We like guys who get a lot of volume, and we like guys who get a lot of air yards, but he's not getting the crazy 14 air yards per target. He's getting around 11 air yards per target, but he's getting 9 targets per game right now. So those types of passes are very high percentage in completion, but they're also down the field. So he's in this very interesting sweet spot where you're getting a lot of good volume that is high percentage in terms of yardage and then also completion. So the price tag comes up once again, but it's still not high enough for an offense that we touched on at the top of the show. They're throwing to 3 guys primarily, some games 4 if Olsen gets involved, but it's McCaffrey, DJ Moore, and Curtis Samuel in that order. And now you get just an incredible matchup probably on the outside if Desmond Trufant plays, if not Isaiah Oliver. It doesn't matter who it is. Really good spot for DJ Moore, this entire offense, and it's probably later in the week going to make Kyle Allen pop up a little bit more in some of the things that I do.
Yeah, I think so, man. DJ Moore, like you said, his price is up, but I'd pay more than Gallup or John Brown. I'm just telling you, I'd pay more than him for more than Shark. I'd pay more than Sutton for DJ Moore. That's where I'm at on him this week. I just think that you're getting, for cash games or for tournaments, very reliable opportunities. Production, you never know. But in terms of sustainable targets and sustainable, like a big workload, it's there. And you just broke down a lot of good points on it. Anything in the 5K range? Actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's do the 4 and 5K range because generally there's not a ton to feel good about here. So instead of breaking them both up, let's just get into both tiers here. Devontae Parker probably going to see Tre'Davious White, I would think. Tre'Davious White's been unreal, man. Every game I watch of him, he makes 5 amazing plays, breaks up a handful of passes, and just makes it so quarterbacks don't ever want to throw to him. Devontae Parker was actually a solid option last week, had 10 targets. I don't see that being the case this week. Mohamed Sanu against Philadelphia. Deep threat guys with the double move can usually burn them a lot worse. What are your thoughts here below 6K? Of course, below DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, who we already talked about.
Yeah, so just to close the door on Tre'Davious White, 10 targets his way against Odell, 3 catches, 27 yards.
Amazing.
Four of them were red zone targets from the 2-yard line. So in terms of beating Odell 4 times on jump balls, not many people can say that they've done that in a single season, let alone a game.
But did you see some of the plays that he made to break up some of those passes?
Yeah, in terms of just deflection, yeah. He looked really good out there. He's looked solid as sort of an undersized cornerback too. So the 5K range closing out, the guy who's the most interesting to me outside of those Carolina guys, Samuel, DJ Moore, is probably Tyrell Williams. I imagine I'll have some interest here. A lot in Josh Jacobs in the backfield, but I have some Derek Carr interest, and Tyrell Williams stands out as just the clear number 1 receiver, 14.5 air yards per target. 5,400 is a nice price point. Then getting into the 4K range, we'll see if D.D. Westbrook suits up. 4,500 with Nick Foles coming back. Probably a lot of people forget, but all the hype in the world was coming out after Nick Foles threw the ball like 7 times in a preseason game, scored a touchdown to D.D. Westbrook, and then he gets injured week 1. So that's a spot to potentially rekindle some of that target love and volume from Nick Foles to D.D. Westbrook. 4,500 is definitely interesting as long as he suits up and plays. And the 5K range is just guys who are interesting, but nobody stands out a ton. You have Jamison Crowder's price up in a good matchup, but he has to continue to do what he's been doing based on where the price tag is now. I think he's okay more so for cash. Terry McLaurin, fantastic matchup. We'll see if Darrell Roberts plays this week, but no Tremaine Johnson still out there. It's just I don't think I ever trust Dwayne Haskins to propel a tournament-winning score out of Terry McLaurin. Trust him a lot, but I don't even know if Dwayne Haskins throws the ball more than 20 times in this game. So that's a concern. Yeah, the 5K range is just a little bit tough. I think I prefer the most DJ Moore, Tyrell Williams, Curtis Samuel in that order. The 4K range, D.D. Westbrook stands out the most for me. And then Robbie Anderson, you can take flyers on. Mohamed Sanu against the Eagles is somebody who I'll probably get to more so in cash, but maybe have some volume in tournaments.
Okay.
I also think it's important to point out a lot of people are going to be interested based on the last game in Deebo Samuel. If Emmanuel Sanders is out, that might actually be worse for Deebo Samuel taking over as a number 1 receiver in the offense. And also they're huge favorites in this game. So the pass volume isn't going to be what you just saw from the last game. 12.5 point favorite. I think more times than not, Deebo sees like 5 targets, which just crushes him. But I think the ownership will prop up because of the big Monday night game.
All right. So anything dirt cheap that you want to talk about at wide receiver before we close it out at tight end?
Yeah, I think Russell Gage, at least in cash, is very interesting at 3,300. No Austin Hooper, no obviously Mohamed Sanu. 68 routes run the last 2 weeks and 12 overall targets. So $3,300 doesn't have to do a lot for you to get you there, especially in cash. And then Traquan Smith ran more routes and was on more snaps last week than Ted Ginn. So if we're talking about trying to stack in a very expensive Michael Thomas, I think I prefer Traquan over Ted Ginn as the other guy in that stack right now.
Okay. Tight end. It's been a brutal position. There's no doubting that. George Kittle, we'll see what his status is coming into week 11. He was inactive yesterday with that knee and ankle injury. Mark Andrews with his first 2 touchdown game of his career. Real solid effort against Cincinnati. Austin Hooper technically doesn't have an injury designation yet because it's early in the week, but I don't think any of us have. He's not going to play, right? There's no way he's going to play this week. Darren Waller's disappeared, but I think if there was ever a spot for him to regain some momentum, it would be this week. And then Zach Ertz against New England. Those are your guys above 5K on DraftKings. Go ahead and break it down.
Yeah, so above 5K, it's just a brutal week overall here. You have Mark Andrews priced up pretty significantly now to a guy who has to continue to do what he's doing. Limited snaps, we know, very good routes run, but rely on touchdowns to an extent. You only had Lamar Jackson throw the ball, 17 times last week? You had only 22 total routes run by wide receivers for Baltimore last week. You had 12 for Hollywood Brown. You had 10 for Willie Snead. That was it. Nobody else ran a route. That's absolutely insane. So Mark Andrews will continue to run routes, but they run routes with other tight ends. He's 6,100 now. in a relatively difficult matchup against Houston. So that's really difficult for me to want to get to. Darren Waller's the guy who stands out the most above 5K for me. Yes, Kittle's reliant. He'll probably, even if they're leading by a lot, see 7 targets if healthy. He's just $7,000, so he's going to have a big game. I think I like the most here, Darren Waller. Tough matchup for Ertz. I'll see if I do get there, but I probably don't now that once again you have no Deshaun Jackson. It's just going to make it more difficult for Ertz in the middle of the field.
Dude, that's going to be a real tough spot. We've seen how many teams just, and not even great teams, take Ertz away out of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And even if he has a solid game, like he's 5,000, so he's cheap enough where a 50-yard 5-catch game is like doesn't burn you, but like that's probably upside in this type of a matchup. And then you're relying on, does he get into the end zone? I'd rather not gamble with touchdowns at 5K. I'd rather do that in like the 3K range.
Right, exactly. All right. It gets ugly, but Jared Cook, this was actually a spot where the week that I forget who everyone was on Eifert. I had written the pivot article as Jared Cook being a pivot off of Eifert against Tampa Bay. He dropped that 1 touchdown, but he still had 4 for 41 and a touchdown on 6 receptions. He had 10 targets last week, tied for Alvin Kamara for the lead, behind Michael Thomas for the second most targets of the game. Jared Cook, I don't love the price tag, but can we make an argument for him once again in a concentrated offense against the Tampa Bay team that has not only been bad, but is also, hemorrhaged fantasy production to opposing tight ends this season?
Yes, so I think the priority goes in this offense. It usually goes Michael Thomas, the running backs, usually Kamara, and then the tight end for 2 or 3 years straight. Now, even dating back to Jimmy Graham, he was probably more of a priority when they didn't have Kamara there. But yeah, Jared Cook is a guy who has been relatively involved all season, but more so really what they were saying in the preseason has come to life over the last couple of games for them. So at 4,400, it's a bit of a steep tag. I think he's priced up by like probably 500 because of the matchup or so, but it's a spot where if I'm stacking, yeah, I'm definitely going to get to Michael Thomas. But then Jared Cook might be my next option just because of pricing and question marks around Kamara and then just how expensive it gets. So Jared Cook, I mean, they don't really use wide receiver 2 and 3s in this offense all that often because they don't throw down the field. So although some of them have nice price tags, Cook's probably the one who gets the most stable volume if it's 6 or 7 targets in a game where they're 27.5 point team total. I like him. He's definitely right now a guy who's listed in like my top 5 tight ends early in the week. But I really like OJ Howard and what we saw at 3,600. He's cheaper. I know he's in a different price range, but 41 routes run led season high for him. One more than he ran, I think, week 6. So 3,600 against New Orleans on the opposite side of this game. That's another spot that I'll definitely be looking at.
Okay. Let's close it out here. We got about 5 minutes running up till 12. It's funny. We took a little bit less time on this slate. It does go to show you that there are a decent amount of fairly obvious plays to start the week. Do you feel like that's the same case at tight end?
Yeah, I do think that's the case at tight end this week. Like, I think, at least for me, what stands out is Darren Waller, OJ Howard, and then there's just a list of like 4 guys with question marks by them for me. And those guys with question marks aren't even like in great spots. They're just cheap, like Luke Stocker, Irv Smith Jr., Eric Ebron's actually a guy we should probably touch on. He's the same price as Howard. He might go unnoticed, but he played a season high in snaps. He talked to Frank Wright and pretty much said, like, I want more in this offense. And lots of the times the coach will say, yeah, sure. And you don't know what happens. And it's just coach speak. It's a 1-game sample, but he saw 12 targets. He had a touchdown that was actually ripped out of his hands and then ruled a fumble in the end zone as a touchback. He was falling to the ground. It was a very weird play. But he saw 12 targets, and he's now priced below Jack Doyle, who's been surviving on low volume and
You're talking about that beautiful one-handed rip reception or interception at the front at the goal line?
This one was in the back of the end zone. It was like the back right corner.
What team am I thinking of where he came up one hand, ripped the ball out of the receiver's hand for the interception in the end zone? I can't remember. I don't know if you saw it.
It very well could be that. All I remember from it was Ebron was like halfway falling to the ground. It wasn't at the goal line. Like he was in the end zone fully, halfway falling to the ground, and the ball just gets ripped out of his hands. And
that was it.
They're both like pretty much having it, but it was ruled a fumble or I guess interception. Yeah. I don't know.
It was ruled an interception, and it was an interception too. It was a beautiful interception. But yeah, you're right. He was targeted in the end zone.
Yeah. So it's at the end of it, he's now priced like last week. I like Doyle more because he was priced below Ebron. But Ebron's now priced below Doyle, and Doyle's had 8 targets the last couple of weeks. Ebron had 12 this past week alone. So we'll see what happens with T.Y. Hilton. For sure will impact that. And also something else to point out, Devin Funchess is back. He is supposed to be practicing this week. We'll see if he does play, but this can shake up a lot for the overall offense. If T.Y. comes back and Funchess, it makes guys like Zach Pascal kind of risky and maybe even obsolete. And these tight ends might not be as interesting. So definitely track the wide receivers for Indy throughout the week.
Okay. Final thoughts here before we head out, Sal. 11 games, a few teams with some very high totals. The highest going to Oakland and then San Francisco and then Carolina and then the Saints. And then, of course, the Dallas Cowboys. So no big surprises there. If the week started today, how about this? We'll finish it like this. It'll be a fun question. And by the way, for those of you that haven't checked out awesomemode.com, use the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word, to get 50% off your first month. Player projections, ownership projections, top stack tools, literally premium content for any sport that has DFS contests offered. And you can do weekly passes for $3.95 a week. But if you want to get 50% off your first month of all access Awesemo Plus membership, use the sign-up code NFL Strategy. It'll get you half off. Go to awesomemode.com/join. And of course, hit that thumbs up button before you head out. We appreciate your support, and it helps us keep putting up free content here on the YouTubes. Subscribe, hit that notification bell as well. All right, so if the week started today, you're building a single entry tournament lineup. Who is the one player at each position that you're locking in? So top running back, wide receiver, quarterback, and tight end, you're locking in 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right. So single entry tournament. So
yep.
I kind of want to correlate this then. So
and you play a lot of single entry, right? So this is in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, single entry and 3-max is like the primary thing that I do. So if I'll go right now, I'll go Matt Ryan because I'm going to try and correlate this. I'll go Matt Ryan at quarterback. Going over to running back, who knows if this all fits in. But one player, that's it. Christian McCaffrey. Wide receiver, if I have to get one player locked in here, give me DJ Moore. And then tight end, I'll take OJ Howard.
OJ Howard, all right. Love it. I'm assuming you haven't done a whole lot of digging on defenses yet.
No, not at all.
Me neither, at all. And honestly, look at some cheap options, and if they work, they work. Dude, if you check, Laz Gets Fit, man. If you guys watched our strategy show yesterday with Manny, Laura, and myself, if you missed it, I promise you want to go back and watch this. It's the best one we've had all season. What we came across on lineup study, Fantasy Cruncher lineup study, blew our minds on the live stream. We came across this as it happened. Nothing was planned. We found it just as anyone else would on air live, and everyone else got to experience it with us. It was insane. Check that out. It's the Monday Morning Quarterback Strategy Show with Manny, Laura, and myself. All right, Sal, where can they find you as we get out of here for the morning?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SalVetcherDFS. I'll be on tomorrow with Josh Engelman at 9:30 talking NBA strategy. Thursday, we'll be back here with Lofty at 11 a.m. Same thing on Saturday with Chris Randone, 11 a.m. And then I have a YouTube channel, just Sal Vetri, some more content over there. I want to look at what you guys are talking about now tomorrow.
Dude,
I'm assuming it has to do with defenses.
When you get a chance, just go ahead and watch that stream. I will. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Put it this way. A guy won like $300,000 with some of the wildest lineups you'll ever see. And with 150 lineups, he had 6 of them with Andy Dalton. There's your teaser.
Whew.
There's your teaser. That'll do it for us. Thanks for tuning in as always. We'll be back with you today. I will on the deeper dive with Adam Shire. I got something great coming up on that one. You'll definitely want to be there. And I'm not blowing smoke. I got something good planned. I even mentioned it yesterday. You got Live Before Lock coming up as well. That'll take you up to 7 p.m. lock for NBA. A ton of content on the site today. Jake Hari's got your daily NFL strategy show or NHL strategy show at 4 p.m. PGA DFS picks with Ben Rasa and Tim. That's at 2:30 p.m. Whew, we're loaded here, baby. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the strategy show. Chris Baggs and myself.